Hey, what's up folks? It's been a while since I made my last video, but in the meanwhile, I was watching some of my older videos and I've noticed that I've been a little bit rude in some of them in a way that I'll tell you guys, hey, don't do this or don't do that. And in most of the cases, I made mistakes. So that's why I'm telling you, don't do something. This is one of those videos. Today we're talking about LED lighting. If you decide to ramp up your LEDs, since you may be planning to get some of the corals that demand more lighting, or you decided to change out your old lighting fixture to a new one, this will be a perfect video to watch, so make sure to stick around. So let's talk right off the bat about mistakes that I've done with my LED lighting. I've tried in the past to tinker with them,
and I've lost lots of corals. I lost some of the anemones as well.
And that's why plenty of cases will tell you guys, hey, don't move any of your lighting, just leave it as is. And that's the perfect advice you can give to a beginner. And I know plenty of you guys have been in the hobby for a while, you know that you can move your lighting little by little. Nobody has done any testing about how much we can move our LEDs and our corals will end up being fine. And that's why the perfect advice for beginners is just don't touch them. If your coral's looking great, leave them as is. Let's say you have a pretty good lighting fixture and you decide to go with acroporas or anemones or any corals that demand more lighting, and all you had so far is softies and LPS corals, which is pretty normal for beginners, and now you have to ramp up those lights. You have to do it very slow. And let's start first with the basics. Let's say you have an LED fixture that's pretty good for the corals you're planning to get, you just want to ramp it up, and let's say you ramp up your lights 2 or 3 or 5%. You're gonna leave them as is, and in the next few days, what you're gonna do, you're gonna test alkalinity. Since if your alkalinity consumption comes up, which means that your alkalinity when you test, let's say it was 8.5 and now it's 8, that means that your corals that you have in your tank like the change, and in that case you have to ramp up the dosage, or if you're doing it manually, you have to start adding more alkalinity and calcium so it can keep up with that demand. Since either way, most of the corals that demand higher lighting are pretty sensitive corals, pretty sensitive on lighting change and parameter change, which means we have to keep our parameters pretty stable. And in that case, as I said, we have to ramp up our dosage of alkalinity and calcium and keep testing the rest of the parameters just so we can keep up with all that new demand. And of course, you're gonna look at your corals, especially if you have some low light corals on top of your rock structure. You probably wanna move those corals a little bit further down in your tank, maybe in a sand bed or in a corner of your tank. That's usually when you have at least amount of lighting. If you give too much lighting on the corals that don't really appreciate too much lighting, that usually start to get more whiter, which folks in this hobby will call it bleaching, and you don't want to do that because bleaching is one of the worst things you can do to your corals. It's very hard to bring back the coral that started bleaching. It's always a better option to have a coral that's kind of browned out that gets less lighting than the one that's bleaching. So if you know that you have those type of corals, probably move them down sooner the better. Other thing, for instance, some of the corals, if they're stretching, for instance, you have zoanthids or mushrooms, usually all those corals, when you give them more lighting, they usually start to come down. If you see your zoanthids, they were big and fluffy, and now all of a sudden they're small and they're shrinking. Probably giving them too much lighting. And again, as I said, you probably want to move them somewhere lower in the tank, and that way you want to save that coral. You're going to make sure that coral's doing well. So okay, you decided to swap up your current lighting to a new lighting fixture. What you want to do is try to mimic as much as you can your old lighting fixture. That's of course assuming that you do have corals in your tank. If you don't have corals in your tank, you can basically set up your new lighting fixture however you like. But if you do have corals, and especially if you have lots of them, you're going to try to mimic your old lighting fixture as much as you can, and then afterwards slowly but very slowly try to ramp up those lights. Since most of the folks, they're getting newer lighting fixtures, they're trying to have more lighting coverage, or they're shooting for higher pars. They want to keep corals that demand that, like for instance acroporas or some other SPS out there. And when you've done that, when you mimic completely your old lighting fixture, when you say mimic, if your older lighting fixture was turning on at 7 a.m., you want to turn on the new fixture at 7 a.m. If the older lighting fixture was turning off at, let's say, 5 p.m., you want to turn off the same new fixture at 5 p.m. And again, for instance, if you had, let's say, in the middle of the day full spectrum and beginning and the end of the day you had more of a blues, you're going to try to mimic that with your new lighting fixture as well. And make sure to measure my par on the top of my tank, like right underneath the water surface, somewhere in the middle of my tank and on the bottom. And now when you're done that, I'll test my alkalinity for sure, and then I'll swipe my lighting, and let's say I'm going to set up my new lighting on 100%, and again I'm going to do the same. I'm going to do the measurements on the top of my tank, in the middle of my tank, and the bottom of my tank. And if, let's say, my old lighting was projecting around 250 par, was, let's say, the average, and the average of the new lighting is around 350, 400, that means that I have to ramp down my lighting and keep measuring par until I reach similar amount of par or a little bit lower, and then afterwards when your coils adjust and if your alkalinity and calcium consumption start to come up, which means again that you have to dose a little bit more alkalinity and calcium, then afterwards you can start ramping up those lights little by little, and that way you're going to ensure that your coils are adjusting well. So let me ramp up this real quick. Again, if you have no coils in your tank, you can probably do whatever you like. If you have some coils in your tank, you have to adjust those lights as much as you can to a low lighting fixture. Try to mimic everything and test alkalinity. And if your tank is full of coils, you're going to have to do all that and test alkalinity and phosphates and nitrates so you can make sure that those don't bottom out. Of course, if everything ends up being perfect. There's some coils that are more sensitive to the lighting change than other coils. But there's one thing that's going to happen if you swipe up your lights, and let's say you bleach a lot of your coils that are sensitive to that lighting change, like acroporas are, like anemones are, like some other coils are as well. Let's say you do that, and right away when that happens, if your coils start bleaching, and let's say you have lots of big colonies, your tank was fully loaded with coils, you had your alkalinity and calcium dosage set up to that current growth, and if they end up not lighting your new lighting, they're gonna stop growing, which means your alkalinity and calcium are gonna start raising up, and your phosphates and nitrates are gonna start raising up since those coils are not growing anymore and they stop consuming alkalinity, calcium, phosphates and nitrates, and of course all other elements. And now all the other coils that are not sensitive to lighting change are gonna start going downhill since they're getting all that alkalinity spike, all that phosphate spike, and that's not something that none of the coils enjoy. Even the hardiest coils in this hobby, even the softer coils, even the mushrooms, zoanthids, none of the coils will enjoy that. Since this is going to happen most of the time if you ramp up your new lighting a little bit higher than you should have, and now your coils are too stressed and they stop growing, you're going to have to lower down percentage of that new lighting fixture just so you can give your coils a break. And at that point you're going to have to make sure to lower alkalinity and calcium dosage, and of course feed less, probably do a water change, and just deal with that situation as best as you can. And this is one of the things that scares me a lot, and that's why I'm trying to back off from that. When I see new lighting, I'm like, all right, that's just great. I won't change mine. I look at my coils are doing great, and that's all I care about. Hopefully this video helps. If you guys swapped your old lighting with the new lighting fixture, tell me how it went. I'd love to know. If you guys missed my last video, I'm gonna make sure to link it right here where I talked about my anemones and how to take care of them. With all that out of the way, see you guys next video. Peace.